Hello and welcome to Fable's Cove, a new podcast that is a fantastical narrative podcast where dungeon masters, story writers, and tabletop enthusiasts alike get to hear the stories of everyone on the show. Today, I have my good friend Chris here. How you doing, Chris?
Doing good, bud. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited for this episode. I kind of brought you up a little bit in the first episode because I was so excited for it, and
Cool, man.
today we're going to walk through a bunch of stuff. But I guess let's start off with you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about your podcast. What's your F'n Binge? You've had a bunch of guests on there, like Derek Long and Jim Tiger and stuff. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, man. First and foremost, I guess for you and your crew, I'm kind of a dinosaur, so I'm a lot older than you guys are. But what I talk to everybody about is what they're currently binge watching. And I do it with a different take. I don't want to know what the show is that you're going to talk about before you're on the show. I have to actually guess it. So I ask you who, what, when, where, and why, and try to figure out what fucking show it is that you're talking about. Most of the time, I'm able to guess it. Like right now, for the last couple months, I've been able to guess 10 out of the 11 shows that people have brought up. And this ranges everywhere from Columbo from the 1970s to Doomsday Preppers. I've been able to guess all of these fucking shows, and it's really weird, but it's a really fun thing to talk about because binge is such a part of the lexicon. Like it's actually something that's used in everyday, even in psychology. Like people talk about binge holes, like you're in between the shows that you're actually watching. So there's actually a terminology that's used in psychiatry where people are in binge depressions because their show ended. You invest so much time into it. The 3 or 4 months that the show runs, and then whenever it's over with, you have to find a new show, and we all invest that time to be able to watch like the first season of a series, and then you're like, this show isn't worth a shit. So then that's like wasted time. So I thought, how cool would it be to be able to actually recommend shows based off of other people's viewing habits, and to be able to watch that show and give a recommendation to my audience, to tell them that, either this show is good based on a scale of 1 to 10, which are our standard tens, or what we call the Hall of Fame tens, are Breaking Bad, Sons of Anarchy, Sopranos, The Office, Parks and Recreation, Vikings, Peaky Blinders. And then it could go slide all the way down to the opposite scale, which we have a hashtag going of hashtag dumpster juice. If I really don't like your show, I'll say it's fucking dumpster juice. And we do it all in fun. It's not personal or anything. But I mean, it is what it is. You're talking to a 50-year-old dude who's drinking Bud Light, smoking a cigarette, smoking a bowl of weed. And if you bring me, fucking Infinity Train, I'm gonna be like, dude, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So it is what it is. But for the most part, we've been able to get some good shows. Like some of the worst reviews that we've done have been for like Virgin River and Riverdale. I gave, which my daughter recommended to me. I gave that a hashtag dumpster juice. That was just absolute fucking filth. But we've had, had a lot of other good shows brought to me. Like the best received show that I've had, the number one listened to show, has been the one that me and my wife did. It was my first interview actually, where she recommended Dead to Me to our audience, which has just come up to be renewed for its third and final season. But I never in a million years would I have ever watched like a chick flick kind of show that's heavily driven with, Christina Applegate, and it's this really female driven show. But I thought it was fucking hilarious, and be able to talk to different people like Larry Hankin and Robert Wool and Jim Tiger and all these other guys, and get their recommendation on the shows that they watch, and then pass it on to viewers, is been really cool, man. It really has. I've gotten really good feedback on it. I've been exposed to a lot of different things that I probably wouldn't watch. Like most of the shows that I've reviewed would never in a million fucking years show up on my trending list on Netflix if it wasn't for doing this. So yeah, it's been really cool, really rewarding. It's What's Your F'n Binge. Just look up What's Your F'n Binge on any social media platform, and you'll find me.
Yeah, it's such an
And you can
interesting.
also find me with Bud Light and a joint in my hand, so it is what it is.
It's such an interesting thing because I know that like we came into communication because of some of the we know names Steve Joyner and the Steve Joyner Network, but it's
Good
interesting
friend.
because since I became a part of that and talked to like so many different people, so many different podcasts, as
Mhm.
well as I do that the podcast density is so high right now with quarantine. There's so many people wanting podcasts, but since I started talking to him, there's so many interesting podcasts that like are different, like the same topics as everyone else, but they do it differently. And you are
A
like one of
difference.
those people where like
And
it's
the really weird thing about that conversation is whenever you bring up density of the lane. Um, the stat going right now is that that there's approximately a million podcasts that have been published, but out of those million podcasts, half of them only put out new episodes like more than once a month, and out of them, only half of them put out content weekly, and out of them, only half of them put out content daily, and out of them, half of them no longer continue to publish. So that number of a million is very overwhelming. But once you divide it down like that, you're really only talking about, I mean, it's still a big fucking number, but you're still only really talking about like 10 or 12,000. And, if you look at like radio stations, the way that it worked in the 70s and 80s, there were fucking hundreds of thousands of radio stations. And now, you have Radio One Network and, what Howard Stern went to, which became Sirius and all that shit. It's not as overwhelming a number as people think it is. Your voice is not lost in the crowd. You're able to overcome all of those other voices if you just remain consistent and keep putting out content. So
yeah, honestly, I mean, and you got dumbasses like us that are trying to trying to run our own show, but
fucking
um
beating your head against the fucking wall, and you're doing what you. If you like it, people will dig it, and that's
yeah,
all that matters. You know.
yeah, it's all about loving it, really. I You said the 80s. You brought up the 80s with radio shows
Right.
in the 80s. And the first thing I want to talk about is actually the early 80s because long story short, Chris here has interacted with Gary Gygax in person and ran modules for him with him, and we're going to get into that. But I want to talk about first just the idea of tabletop games in the 80s. Um, I want to talk about stereotypes and stigmas, and first I want to find out what got you into tabletop in the 80s, and if the whole nerdy stereotype was true, where if you played D&D or tabletop games, you were a nerd, or you were like satanic because your parents thought you worshipped like Satan, and like just all that fun stuff. Like what got you into it?
The really weird thing is, my old man was really cool about the idea. Like the first player's handbook that he came across, or actually the first monster module that he came across. Um, I don't know, just being a Snoopy parent or whatever, he just saw it on my bookshelf or whatever. He didn't come at me with the whole, what the fuck is this, or what are you getting into or whatever. He was pretty cool about the idea, the fact that he saw that I was writing, putting on paper, doing storytelling, and that me and my friends were able to get together and, for a lack of a better way to describe it, we were staying out of trouble because we were all downstairs in the basement eating 5 pounds of Doritos and drinking every Mountain Dew we could see. But we were staying out of trouble. So he was pretty cool with it. And but whenever I went to the Gamers Guild, in my day, in most of the major cities, there were these things. In my town, Evansville, Indiana, we had this thing that was called EGG, Evansville Gamers Guild. And whenever you walked downstairs, which was at a Noble Roman's pizza joint on Washington Avenue, you were able to walk in and you knew exactly what you were walking into just by looking at the cast of characters. You knew that these people
It's still
were.
that way. It's still that
It,
way.
it, it's so much that way, and it's always been that way. You're talking about these people who are very introverted, that they find this way to be able to express themselves by hiding behind a character sheet or behind their DM shield. And I don't think that that has changed a whole lot over the past 40 years. Maybe the way the kids now look and express themselves, like we didn't have blue hair back then. But at the same time, you might see a spiked collar or a mohawk, or you might see a bunch of leather jackets and, a bunch of these guys that are trying to look tough, but at the end of the day, they're, playing a elf warrior princess or, what the fuck ever, I mean, I don't think it's really changed a whole lot, to be honest with you. Just the mechanics that everybody plays the games with. The game has really advanced itself in a lot of different ways. It's become so specialized, and there's so many diversionary games from it. From Dungeons and Dragons, you were able to look at the first renditions of Chill. Chill was the forerunner of Cthulhu. It was a vampire hunter's game, and it was made by Spotlight Games. Sorry, Gaslight Games. It was made by Gaslight Games, and they were the forerunner to Chaosium, which actually ended up doing the Cthulhu rules and Stormbringer, and they were the forerunner to GURPS. And then you had Marvel and DC superhero game systems come out, and people were able to really divert a whole lot from the original D&D box set, which we were able to buy at the bookstores for $12.99, and it included an 8 to 10 page pamphlet for the player's guide, a 4 to 6 page pamphlet for the DM guide, a board that you're able to fold out, and a couple cardboard cutouts to show your orc and goblins. And that's how D&D started. And looking at how it started in that original box set and what you're able to do now, um, the creative process that people are really able to dive into if they really take it to that next level, and they really put their, some people are at a place where they put their heart and soul into it, where that's what you have, that's your social dynamic. And that really hasn't changed a whole lot for the past 40 years, as far as those basement nerds who are playing D&D. um, it's really not that much different today than it was 40 years ago, other than the fact that we didn't have fucking flat screens, or laptop to be able to pull up graphics. But,
Yeah.
other than that, the storytelling and the creativity and the imagination is stayed true to form, really, even though they're at fifth edition of D&D, or AD&D, as it's called now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's still like holds true to this day. Like in terms of D&D or Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, like I used to go to a tabletop place called Family Fun Hobbies, and I would go there, and I think it's a chain place. I'm pretty sure it's a chain place, but it was the only place near me. So I would go over in Hamilton, and every time I walked in, I would go for either Friday Night Magic, I would go for like Monday Night D&D, I would play a Pokemon draft, and as soon as you walk in, you
Right.
like know that the people that are there to play D&D or play
Yeah.
Commander and
You know,
Magic.
as soon as you walk in the door, you're amongst your kind. Really, people who are like-minded, and maybe, as you're growing up, whenever I got into it, it was probably seventh grade for me, and my only like socially outward activity was, as far as like being a jock or whatever, like I wrestled, but socially I was like really not cool, So uh, the best way for me to fit in was using my imagination. I read every Every Conan, every Tarzan, all of Dune. I read fucking everything. And the best way to be able to express all of that was to take this open concept and be able to, map it out and explain what's going on to your friends. And, whether it's the art of DMing or becoming a good character player, there's levels of skill that come with that. You're a beginning day person, and then looking at them a few years later and seeing how developed they are, understanding the nuances of character classes, or how to express that character. Like, there's a lot of work that actually goes into it, and people really undervalue that. They really do. And that's something I really like, got a really deep interest and a really deep love of, like, as soon as I was exposed to it, like, really and being like a jock wrestler or whatever, but uh as soon as I was able to sit across the table from quite a few of these people, it was like, these are like-minded people. These are people who are using their imagination, maybe using their social awkwardness or whatever, but being able to use it in a way that they're able to express themselves. That was something I really like gravitated towards for whatever weird reason. I'm probably the only like state caliber wrestler you've ever fucking met that played D&D religiously. Especially back then. It just wasn't really heard of, but it was something that I immediately gravitated towards and really fell in love with right off the bat. As soon as I read my first Dragon magazine and read the box rules for the original D&D.
Yeah, it's like yeah,
Oh,
clicks.
is
I
this
feel
still
like
a thing?
what's
Is
that?
Dra is Dragon magazine still out there?
I'm honestly not sure because I'm not subscribed to it if it is. But you know what I guess really
It
the
was
main
80s and early 90s. Like, the original anti-paladin rules for D&D was published in Dragon, and the original ninja vampire for Chill was written in Dragon, and all of this like really cool shit where all of these other game developers or writers were able to come together and publish articles and put it out to, not the masses, but the rest of the gamers. It was almost like a social bulletin board, um, to an extent, in a printed form. It was almost like Facebook for gamers, but in a printed form back then. And maybe it's not around because social media has developed in such a way now, but it was so cool every month to be able to open up and see this fucking awesome graphic on the front of whatever cool dragon, an ice dragon or a white dragon or a black dragon or whatever, or an anti-paladin knight riding it, or like Nazgul or whatever. This fucking incredible artwork that was on the cover of it, and then be able to just read through. You saw a couple articles from Gygax. You saw a couple articles from the creators of Wizards of the White Coast, or Chaosium and Warhammer 4K or 40K and all that shit. Whenever it first started, way back in the day, being able to see that stuff in that magazine, be kind of a shame if it's not around anymore. Hopefully, there's some version of it.
yeah, I've never heard of it personally, but I'm actually that's why I'm enjoying talking to you right now because what that makes me think of is D&D Fifth Edition's Unearthed Arcana. I don't know if you know what that is.
I
Um,
totally know what it is.
yeah, because how they release that playtest like publications for you to test and like
Uh-huh.
report on what you think of it, and that's what I think of like when they first started testing
That's
stuff
what the
like that.
magazine kind of was like, actually. Now, looking at it that way, maybe it has been replaced by that and with social media. But yeah, that's exactly what Dragon Magazine was.
I'm gonna look into that when we get off.
So, I'll have to look it up now myself now that we're talking about it, because we're going to dig up a bunch of shit I haven't thought about in 20 or 30 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, let's get into the digging because
Yeah.
oh my god, because you when I was talking to you throughout the week over Facebook and email and stuff, you were talking to me about like gaming conventions and like the history of like tabletop and if I remember correctly, you had brought up like going to gaming conventions and
Mhm.
talking about like DM ratings and GM ratings and that you have your own rating
Yep.
And I guess for the people that don't like know, me myself included, like what is a GM rating, and like how did you go about getting one at gaming conventions and stuff?
So yeah, back in the day. Okay, so this is circa 1979. Okay. Um, Dungeons and Dragons at first came up with player and DM ratings for conventions. Like if you said you were a DM and you went to a convention and then it turned out that you were a shitty DM because you're playing in front of a bunch of master players, that would be found out very quickly. Does that make sense? So they came up with this rating system based on your number of appearances, the games that you completed. If you were a DM, the rating of all the players that were at your table. And if you're playing at a convention back in those days, I don't know how they do it now, but back in those days, for you to even qualify to get DM points, you had to play at a table with at least 6 to 8 players. There was none of this 3 to 4 player shit. You
Six
had to
to
have
eight players?
8 players, and you had to be able to. For you to be able to get your DM points, you had to be able to finish the module within 4 hours, the prescripted period. This was supposed to be a 4-hour module, so you had to finish it with your 6 to 8 fucking players, and you know how that is having that many people. It's a madhouse if you're the DM. So you had to be able to control your 6 to 8 players, get the module finished within that prescripted period of time, reach the conclusion, defeat the purpose, collect the reward, and everybody understand what the module was about. And everybody at the end of it on their character sheets, they had to write a rating for the DM and for the other 5 to 7 players. So if you're one of the 6 to 8 players, you had to rate all the players that you played with and the DM for how they participated in the module, how they played their character. Like if my friend Bob is a thief, did he play a thief well? If my friend Mike is a cleric, did he play the cleric well? Chris is the DM. How well did he control everybody? How well did he elaborate? How well did he tell the story? And so all of that went into your end of the day ratings that came from all of the conventions back then. And all through the 80s, I went to conventions probably at the very beginning, whenever I got into gaming at the age of 7th grade, so about the age of 12 or 13, 81 or 82, I started going to one-a-month conventions. We would go to Tennessee, we would go to Illinois, we would go to Ohio. And my dad was just letting me go with, these fucking grown-ups who are other nerds too, right? But he was like, okay, this is what he's into. And this was during the off season whenever I didn't wrestle. And so I would probably, whenever I first got into it, I would probably go to like 8 or 9 conventions a year. And that's how I built up my player rating. And then in 1984, at GlatherCon, which is held in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I got my first master's card for being a DM. I'd done, I think it was 38 or 39 modules as a DM. And we went to GlatherCon in Minnesota, and I pulled my module, and I had played at 3 other tables with Gary Gygax before that. I at GlatherCons before that in 83, 82, and 81. And I pulled my module where Gary was a player. And it's like, how do you throw a football to the guy who invented a fucking football? It was like really a oh shit freak out fucking moment. It really was, man.
I can't imagine the stress, like, and
Being
excitement
40 fucking years
behind
old.
that. Like, that's nuts to me. Like, it's insane to me. And even what you're saying with like player ratings and DM ratings, I can't like imagine that being a thing now, because even
And
in
this is paper. Okay, keep in mind this was all done on paper back then. Like there
yeah.
might have been a couple of computer programs where everything was dumped into at the end of the day, but for the most part, 99% of all this was all done on paper. And it was all up to the guild leaders to be able to take all these paper ratings and get it into the national system. the national system of players. Um, it's such a weird thing because I know it doesn't exist anymore because there's so many online forums. Um, but yeah, again, it's 1984, GlatherCon, and I pull Gary Gygax is one of the players. Bob Etheridge is one of the others. Lisa Carter is another one. All of these people have written modules for Dungeons and Dragons. And this was one of the forerunners of the Ravenclaw series, the module that I pulled. So we're doing vampires in D&D, which hadn't been really done up to that point. And this is the first edition of D&D. Ravenclaw was actually done on second edition AD&D, not even D&D. So we're talking 3 series later before Ravenclaw ever came out. We're running this fucking module in Minnesota, and I'm doing it with people who have written everything that you know now, to be honest with you, as far as players compendium, monster modules, everything. Lisa was actually one of the people who originally did the monster compendium that included Cthulhu and Elric, these Chaosium series characters that was after the first edition was wiped out of the D&D player's handbook because they had broken copyright rule. So you weren't able to actually convert those players or those characters over to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons if you did not have that first edition book. You had to have that to be able to actually play Elric or any of the Cthulhu mythos.
Something that the one thing that I take away from the modules, like AD&D first edition, second edition, because like some of my favorite publications came out in second edition, like what you were talking about with Ravenloft and stuff like that. They have like yeah, like Ravenloft is now, the Curse of Strahd and 5e. Dungeon of the Mad Mage is my favorite publication from Wizards of the Coast. That was second edition module, and they remastered it for fifth edition. But that was like I wish I know I'm 23 and I'm saying I was born in the wrong generation, but I like I wish I could have been there to experience the origination of these and how they're so important that they managed to remaster them for fifth edition.
And the really cool thing is the rendition of, because going from D&D to now fifth edition players, you're talking about 40 years of writing that's gone into that. And fourth edition was a flop. Third edition wasn't received very well. Even whenever fifth edition first came out, everybody hung on to second for the most part. I know everybody predominantly now plays fifth edition, but there was probably a 10 or 15 year period where everybody held on to second edition because they thought that was the best written, well conceived. They had, all the nuances of all the different character classes, whether you wanted to be the barbarian, cleric, or, all of those subclasses that first happened in second edition. It wasn't that way at the beginning. But in 1986, at another GlatherCon, there was the original Horror by Gaslight series, which was called Chill. And Gary Gygax was one of the founders of that, which is the forerunner to Cthulhu. Are you familiar with Cthulhu?
Yeah, like Call of Cthulhu, you mean? Like that?
Yeah. Call of Cthulhu. Yes, very much. Yeah. Hang on a second. Trying to hand my wife the wallet. Hang on.
That's fine. Yeah, I wanted to make sure there wasn't like a prior Cthulhu that I should have known about.
So I laugh at that because H.P. Lovecraft. If you look at the forwards of every horror writer since Edgar Allan Poe, other than Edgar Allan Poe, whether you're talking about Stephen King, John Carpenter, Clive Barker, if you look in their forwards, they all acknowledge H.P., Howard Phillips Lovecraft. And I was such like I was the biggest fucking nerd fan there ever was of H.P. Lovecraft. So much to the point that I have the Elder sign tattooed on my arm.
Nice. No
uh,
shame, dude. That's badass.
and the beginning lines of "The Thing That Should Not Be" by Metallica. That's a song about H.P. Lovecraft's mythos. Whenever Chill first came out, before Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu was around, which was originally done by Chaosium, which was the forerunner to Wizards of the White Coast. Now, what's the new version of Wizards of the White Coast? Wizard Coast or whatever the fuck it's called.
Wizards of the Coast, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the original forerunner of that was Wizards of the White Coast, and before that was Arkham. And Arkham put out Chill. And 1986, I pulled a module that was written by GYG, Gary Gygax. And I DM'd for him a module that he wrote, and he played it as a player at Glathricon. And Chill was the original 1920s kind of Sherlock Holmes version of Vampire Hunter gaming system. And everything was done on percentiles. It was the first percentile based games where you rolled your D20s or two D10s to come up with a percentile rating. It was the first game that did that. Before that, the only thing that was done was D10 and D20 with your armor class or your weapons, like D&D had done for so many years before. And they were the first ones to come up with that. And running that game, which was set up around Vlad Tepes, and it was a 6-hour fucking module, and I had 8 players at my hands, and one of them actually had press credentials. The other one was a computer programmer. The other one was a newspaper reporter, and 3 others were writers that had developed modules. 2 of them for Dragon Magazine, one being Gary fucking Gygax, the other one Lisa Carter, the other one Bob Etheridge. These are all Grandmaster DM level fucking people at that time, whenever the rating system was around. And I'm 17 years old, and going through this whole fucking module, it was just really weird because Gary was able to completely take himself away from the fact that A, he wrote the gaming system, B, he wrote the fucking module, C, he knows what the end result is supposed to be, but he's able to play his character truly. And being able to sit at the table with somebody like that who's just a nerd like you or me, but the fact that you're able to see that expertise or just that development of what it is really all about. Like now there's LARPing and all this other stuff, and Skyrim, where you're not able, you either have no personal involvement with other people, or you have so much, but the gaming part of it is kind of lost, with LARPing or whatever. Being able to sit at the table at those times, and in the convention center in Minneapolis, we were playing at a table. We were a spotlight table, one of 4 spotlight tables, but there were 32 or 35 other tables of games going on at the same time. And you're talking about all of these people who wrote every fucking module you could think of. Everything that had been put out, everything that was in Dragon Magazine, everything on, like DMing concepts, the best ways to be able to translate it to your players, the best way to be able to show the dungeon to your players, or if you're going outside of the dungeon concept and you're talking about real world development, like which is what Ravenloft brought in. All of these fucking games going on, and all of these like super high level people who are writing articles on how to do it all at the same time, like not getting distracted and looking over at the table next to you where they're rolling out Call of Cthulhu, or three tables over where they're rolling out GURPS, or a few tables over this way and they're rolling out Stormbringer, and not being able to get lost while you're controlling your six or eight players. It was really, I don't know, man. Looking back at it now, and looking at it, knowing the history of it now, like I would probably take a second to pause. Whereas whenever I was only 16 or 17, I was like, fuck this. I'm rolling through my module, man. I'm doing shit because it was all about the ratings. It was all about your player points or your DM points. So you didn't have time to take a breath and look around you. You had to fucking get through it, especially whenever you had that caliber of player sitting at your table. It wasn't every day that you had Gary Gygax sitting at your goddamn table, or Lisa Carter, or Bob Etheridge, or any of these motherfuckers, man. Like that just didn't happen.
What's so something that I didn't mentally process until you said that, when you were like, oh, you had to rush through it, you had to get through it. You were rating. That's
Because back
so
then they published all the modules that you had a 6 hour time limit
yeah. It's
or
just
a 4 hour
crazy
limit,
because now you read books. You read books. Like even short ones, like even the remastered like modules, like White Plume Mountain or Strahd. And now you look at it, and if you read it, it was like you'll start at level 5 and end at level
Those
8,
are
or
campaigns now. Back whenever
yeah.
they were one setting deals.
Yeah, it's just crazy. I never thought of time constraints being a thing for the DM, because now it's more leisurely, where you start it and you're like, you will be level 5, or you start at level 5, you will be level 8. And then you're like,
The,
okay, I have the wiggle room there. And then you get comfortable. I never thought of it as like when you explain it, it's more of like a competitive sense with
it
yourself.
was competitive. It super was, and the transition from going from that module basis where you had the prescribed time limit. It should take 3 to 5 hours to finish this module, is what they would say. So, whenever you would go to rated conventions, you would get 4 hours to do that 3 to 5 hour module. Or if it was rated as 6 to 8 hours, you would get 6 or 7 hours. So, on Saturday afternoon, you're spending 7 hours of the fucking afternoon playing this one module to completion. And then whenever they transitioned module play to campaign play was not the way it started. Campaign play did not come around until the late 80s. That was not how it was done. It wasn't it was not really done that way until they did ElfQuest and a couple of the book series, the Dragon Chronicles and whatnot. Campaign play was not really the way it was done. Everything was module to module. You would come in, sit down, roll out your character. If this module prescribed everybody to be level 8, you would roll out your level 8 character, or level 5, or level 12, depending on the module. Campaign play didn't come around for really quite a long time, actually. And that was really the reason that they came up with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the first edition, was to be able to support that campaign system of playing. Because before that was just basic Dungeons and Dragons. Like I said, it was module to module. The campaigning part of it, character development from level 1 until you got fucking killed off at level 17 or 20. Because every campaign has that breaking point where everybody's just too big and bad and they've collected too much shit. Which is between 15 and 20 for most systems. But yeah, like it was probably a good 12 or 15 years after the original box set was published and put out for people to buy that the whole campaigning part of things was like a regular deal. It just didn't happen back then.
Yeah, I never thought about it like that, because even now, in like the last episode I did about this, I talked about a campaign that I ran for 5 years, almost, well, 4 years, and like
Yeah,
that was
I
my
did
life for a while, because
the idea came around, I was like, fuck yeah, I got this fucking cool ass idea, and we fucking ran with it for years. But like before that, it just didn't go down that way, man. It really didn't. Everything was module to module. You wrote
That's
a character and then
nuts.
threw it away, you know?
That's so weird, man. It's crazy
Yeah.
how like much it evolves. But I mean, it just goes to show it's still working out because here we are talking about it 40 years later.
And now you have this whole digital world of it.
Yeah.
Like the Final Fantasy series, and especially fucking Skyrim and Eye of the Beholder and everything. Like whenever I look at these games, like I'm not a video game guy, but I look at these games and I'm like, God damn, man, these kids, I mean, it's like it would be so fucking cool if we would have had that back then because you could really flesh out your story with if you were able to do some game design or whatever. People who have that ability now, that's now a new tech art. The people who have the ability to do that now is I really um yeah, I really admire those people and kind of envy them. I wish that we would have had that technology back then whenever I was doing that shit, to really be able to flesh out everything in a digital world and be able to pour it into all of these different character concepts. And if you take a left turn or a right turn, it changes the story. Because back in my day, on the old Commodore 64s, playing Bardstown, um, you were able to beat level after level after level. And then if you had taken tech arts in high school, you might be able to go into your Commodore 64 and break the wall and change your character to level 99 and change all of your weapons to plus 12s or whatever and just fucking zoom through the whole fucking program. Um, it was that easy back in those days. And now, I mean, fucking, whenever I look at them, even cheat codes are way harder than that. Seemed to be back then. It's really different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even Wizards of the Coast, which which we touched on earlier, um, they have a digital D&D game, and a few of them,
Yeah,
they're
there's
coming out with
versions.
Baldur's Gate, like the next Baldur's Gate. It looks like a film. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you haven't, I
I've
recommend
seen
it.
it, but it looks fucking phenomenal. I'm like,
Yeah.
God damn, man, to be able to. And then they have those DM programs where you're able to bring it, like, if you have a laptop or a monitor at your game, you're able to bring in all of this shit to your gaming experience. Show the monsters or show, the paths in your dungeon and everything. And it's super cool. It really is, man.
Yeah, like on Roll20 with Fog of War and uploading your own sprite characters and stuff like that. You can even have you can have the sheet online now. I hate Roll20. I don't use the online stuff. What I do is I make maps online and I'll either print it out
Okay.
or I'll send it. But in terms of oh, you know what? Hang on one second here.
Cool.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm on I'm on call.
Yeah,
I want to move
that's
on to something different here. Well, first off, you taught me something new too. Is that I didn't know Gary Gygax's middle name was fucking. So that's pretty cool.
Gary fucking Gygax. Yeah, definitely. Uh, whenever he passed away, it was like there's been a few moments like with social celebrities, I guess, that have made me be upset publicly. First, first and foremost was Kurt Cobain. Second was Lane Staley. Gary was probably the third whenever he passed away. Like no actors or anything else like that. But like he was that important to my life growing up that whenever he did pass, I was like it was I don't know, it was really cool to kind of think back, and then second of all kind of have that a little bit of remorse or regret of not staying in touch, because we all everybody who gets into this, you get into it while you're young, and you go through your teenage years and your young 20s and whatnot. And probably by the time you're reaching your 30s, unless you're a developer, you're probably out of it. And that's kind of the way it was for me. And Gary had Gary passed a few years after that. So not being able to talk to him again, because I talked to him frequently back then. I talked to him by letter. I talked to him on the old bulletin board days. For everybody who's not aware of, before Facebook and whatnot, there was this thing that we all called bulletin boards, where you hooked up by your modem and you're able to talk to people across the country or whatever based on similar likes and whatnot. And there was bulletin boards for everything. I was able to talk to Gary back then, and then you just, life happens, and you have kids or you're married or whatever, and just the time and space that you need to be able to pour into gaming kind of disappears. It's kind of the natural way of things, I guess. But yeah, Kurt Cobain, Lane Staley, and Gary fucking Gygax.
GFG. Yeah, what you said, and I don't want to talk. I don't want to ramble on it too much, because in the last episode, I essentially said the same thing. Like the one thing in my life, this game changed me in a sense where I was actually going to school for something completely different. I was going to school for music education, and I loved it. And since I was 10, I was like, I'm going to be a music teacher, But when I was like 15, I started playing D&D, and it was fourth edition. We were playing fourth edition. We started with 3.5, then we started playing 4, and DM, who was the murder hobo DM, where maybe in AD&D times it was good, but once that narrative develops, you don't want your DM to purposely spawn stuff in so that you die, so
yeah. Nobody wants to for DM.
Yeah, so I got out of it, and I was like, you know what? There was no one else in my area. I graduated with 100 kids in my class. It's so hard to find people near me that want to play. So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna DM. So I started DMing, and over the time when I got into fifth edition, I really realized and appreciated how much goes into this game, and like the narrative aspect, the storytelling aspect. You were saying you played with Gary fucking Gygax, and I bet you said Lisa Carter, I think you said her name was. And even for people to be writing the game and being able to take themselves out of it just to appreciate the like art that goes into it, it stood out to me. And now I'm here, studying game design so that I can eventually hopefully work there. But it's the fact that we live in a time where you can break away from the shitty stuff going on in the world and sit down with people that you might not have even ever met before, and you're playing a different life with each other and like telling a story, writing art essentially. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic
really,
experience.
and there's woefully, there's not a whole lot of people who have actually engaged to be able to have that experience. And that's something that, we all know if you've done it before and did it for an extended period of time, and everybody else looks at you and laughs. But they don't know what they're missing. They really don't.
Yeah.
And the missing out, then if you don't have the imagination or the creativity or the wherewithal to be able to follow a word story that's presented in front of you, and follow the progression of everything that's going on, so be it. Not everybody has to appreciate it, but everybody who has been able to experience it and liked it more than to go past the first game, there's a lot of people who have a common bond out there that it kind of goes unspoken. There's a lot of people who still kind of shove that nerd under the blankets, and they don't really talk about it that much, but it's definitely something that's very cool. And it probably, the world would be a better place if a lot more people were able to experience it and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I could ramble on and on and on, but I won't, I'm happy I got to hear about your like Gygax experience, and and the modules before even AD&D times. It's just crazy to see how much all of it evolved, and
It's really funny to see how the time constraint baffled you, because that was the way that we played everything. And just the next time you play, put that restraint on yourself and see how uncomfortable it is.
I this whole game really it seems to like push your boundaries, and it gets you better with like for a DM, between me and you, like your DM the DM, it's like I feel like it increases your like public speaking skills, you're
Yeah.
handling different situations, and but the time constraint, the only time I've ever done that is when I did run a campaign with 15 people,
Oh
and we
wow.
had because we what it was a campaign, so it was essentially started out in this tavern. I talked about it in the last one, so I won't. But there's three DMs, and we ran basically a different module each time,
Okay,
and
so
but
you
it was
guys
all in the
five players to get the 15. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and then you were all on your own little table, and basically in my garage, and that's what we did. And in order to get done in time, there was a couple times where I had like 3 minute timers on your turns, so that in combat, it didn't take
Okay.
hours on end. But to do it for the whole time, I can't imagine. I can't imagine the stress because you rely on players too. Because you're DMing, but if your players aren't really
So
getting it,
the cool thing about that rating system from back then, is that if you were a DM considered to be okay, so there was wizard status, there was master level, there was also grandmaster. And for you to have a table full of players, they also had to have the credentials to be able to sit at the table with you. So you weren't sitting at a table with a bunch of people who fucked around on time. They understood the concept of what we're getting ready to go through, and they understood that prescriptive period of time that the module was supposed to be finished in. So they were in not as much of a rush, but they understood the finish line needs to be gotten to, or else none of us get credit for this module. That's the worst fucking thing ever, is to have a master DM with a bunch of master players. You have a prescriptive time of 4 hours, and you don't reach the finish in 4 hours. And then the judges come around and they're like, "Are you done?" No. Oh, cool. Nobody gets points.
I can't imagine that. Oh my god, that's
Like, everybody's so fucked. We just wasted 4 hours for fucking nothing because it was that competitive.
yeah. I think that's interesting because the way that it evolved now is that I've never done this. I've never been to an adventurers league, but that's what they call it now. Like if you were to go Monday night, I've done it a couple times, but I never committed. That you go to adventurers league or adventurers guild. That's what they call it, adventurers guild. And the way that they did a leveling system is that if you show up and you do a mission, you get a
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
And then if you want to go from level 1 to 2, you need 2 points. 2 to 3, that's 2 points. And it works like proficiency bonuses, where like once you get a +2 bonus, you need to get 3 points. And then you
Okay.
need to get 4 points. And that's how they did the leveling system. So that's kind of what makes me think that that's what gave them that idea.
Yeah, it's totally the basis of it. I can totally see that. To be a master level DM back in those days, you had to have 10,000 accumulative points. That was a combination of finishing your campaign, leveling up other players, finishing the module within prescriptive time, advancing characters during the module, a couple of other points, and then as a player, um, showing up and participating, obviously, finishing your module, finishing it in the prescribed time, working well with the DM giving you a good rating in return. Yeah, that was the other thing on being a DM. The players had to give you a good enough rating to help you advance as well. So if you pissed off a player and they zeroed you,
I don't like that. I
you
don't
know,
like that one bit.
so you had to, if you had anybody who was full of themselves or whatever, and you didn't cater to them, they could zero you. And then you could not lose your points for that session, but not get as many points as you wanted, or it would actually, on a sliding scale, make you look less than a master DM. And the only way you could play a Glathercon back then, the only way you could DM a module back then was to be a master DM. And at the time that I was doing it, there was only 53 of us in the whole nation. that were rated that high. And then you had guys like Bob Etheridge and Lisa Carter and Gary fucking Gygax who were grandmasters. Um, and there was probably less than 10 of them in the world.
It's funny to me that it's funny to me that Gary fucking Gygax
Yeah.
is he came out with the game and everything, and there's only 10 of them, and he's one of the 10.
Yeah.
That's like if I was to if I was to make up a test and then give myself an A on it because I made it.
Yeah. Yeah.
He certainly deserved it, though. I mean,
Because the way he got there is because so many other people, like Lisa, Bob, and all these other guys who wrote the modules, he was just a player. So he played along in their world. So that's how he got himself there as a player. And then, of course, I mean, you're Gary fucking Gygax. So anytime you sit down and open up your DM screen, everybody's giving you a 10, basically. It is what it is.
yeah.
It's
I
a
wonder if anyone
politics
didn't.
that goes to it. If there's anyone who ever zeroed Gary Gygax, I'd probably punch him in the throat. Yeah.
He'd hop on that initiative train.
See that every, I mean, I didn't see it happening, but it may have. I don't know. I got
Yeah.
zeroed out whenever I ran a Call of Cthulhu module whenever they first came out. Because I had a guy fail a roll of versus his insanity, and he fucking failed it epically. He rolled a double lot, and I was like, "Well, bro, you're fucking rolled up in a fucking fetal position for the rest of the fucking game. That's the way it is." And he zeroed me. I was like, "I can't help your die roll, but I mean, it is what it is."
Yeah, that's what stood out to me about it is because I've had a couple people, obviously in my time, where they roll a shit roll and then they get mad
Yeah,
at you for it, and you punish them, and that's just kind of that's the double-edged sword
I
of
have
being a
five
DM.
options here. I'm going to roll a d20, and these are your five options. 1 through 4 gives you this one. 5 through 9 gives you that one. And it is what it is. It's either cataclysmic or it's not so bad. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
so whatever. People
Well,
they deserve a reroll all the time if they know you.
yeah, yeah. I don't want to keep you here all night, but
I'm cool. You
I
want
would
to talk?
love this. What's that?
You want to talk about the campaign?
Yeah, I would love to actually. I was gonna ask,
Or
in well, I'm assuming that this is probably the same era, but I was gonna ask you, like, in your experience over the years, is there like you've seen the history, you've seen it change. Is there like a golden era to you of like tabletop games, or has it not even happened yet?
for me, there was. Um. So like being a video game player, like we all romanticize Mario Brothers, but you like GTA better, because it's just more of an immersive game. So for me, the transition from D&D, there was a company in the late 80s that ran from 1986 to 1994. And they're the predecessors of the Wizards of the Coast, Wizards of the White Coast. They were formerly known as Chaosium. And they published the series for Stormbringer, which was Elric of Melniboné, a series of books written by Michael Moorcock. Everything was a percentile system. It was the first change from D20, D10. Everything was percentile based. Everything was a lot more fluid, at least for me, on a managing kind of a concept. And because it was all percentile based, I was able to bring in characters or monsters from every gaming system there was. Because it's easy to look at how their strength or agility rating is and convert that to a percentile, which made it easily transferable to the Chaosium system. So I was able to bring in fucking everything for my players. And our campaign went on for almost 5 years, the better part of 4 years. And a couple of my players, Chris Tice and Eric Botkins, they would just come over to my house. This is like 1988, 1989, my first apartment. Come over with a fifth of fucking hot damn, bag of fucking ragweed, maybe a fifth of fucking Schnapster, and be like, all right, dude, let's fucking play the game. Cool. So I'm sitting down with zero fucking preparation. It's time to fucking get down. And we would just fucking ad lib everything. And it went on for a long time. But one of the modules that I was able to pre-write for it was you still there?
Yeah, my camera's like acting up, but I can hear you.
All right, cool. So one of the modules I was able to pre-write was a dungeon that they had to go through, but to be able to get through the dungeon, to be able to get to the main level, they had to. Now, I had 8 players in this campaign, and that was the basis of the idea for me to use a chessboard. And this is way before Harry Potter. Okay, this it is what it is. This is like 1990, 1991.
Sure. Okay.
All of the players, depending on which door they chose to come into this dungeon, determined their position on the chessboard. And so you had the abilities of the rook or a knight or whatever. And that was like all of my players' like favorite fucking thing. After they either got massacred or they got through the chessboard, every other game they're like, "Are we getting the chessboard? Are we getting the chessboard?" Because everybody who was able to get through to the other side, it wasn't so much about from one module to the next. It wasn't so much about defeating the king. It was just getting from one end to the next. On some of them, if they were able to get through and go out the other doors, they got fucking like super rewards for it because they beat the chessboard. And everything in Stormbringer is chaos based. So they got chaos points, which gave them like weird abilities and all of these different stigmas and shit like that. Because it was the point of the game, the way I ran everything was for your characters to be as repulsive as possible, to have all of the anti-rewards of chaos imposed upon you. So instead of being actually rewarded, you're actually kind of cursed or fucked up. That's the way everything went. So everything that they went through on those chessboard scenarios, like everybody really fucking liked that a whole lot. And I was able to bring in all of these different chaos gods as being chess pieces. One time the king might be Ariok, the next time it might be Baloo. All of these different characters from the Moorcock system, the multiverse is what it was back then. It went on for so long, and it would go on multiple nights a week, not just on a weekend. Like they would just show up and be like, "Dude, it's time to play the fucking game." And they're getting fucking high and we're drinking and whatever. And I'd just sit down and I'd be like, all right, it's time to fucking play. And we would just ad lib our fucking way through it. That was probably the funnest gaming I ever did because there was no right or wrong. There was no writ way of doing it. It was just, it was a chaos system and we did it all chaotically, to be honest with you. It was a lot of fucking fun, man. We were all from 17 to 25. We did all this. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's to be able to take the game mechanics and change them into something new that like your players haven't experienced before. Yeah, and have them like it. That's
module. I would take all of these game systems because I worked at this comic book store. So I was able to take all of these game systems, monster modules, and research them and then convert them over to Chaosium. Everything was percentiles. So it was easy to do that if you're good at math. So I would have all of these fucking crazy creatures and all of this fucking stupid shit, all these game systems that don't even exist anymore. Talismanta and Chill and Warhammer 40K before it was really big. I was I had fucking Space Marines fucking getting a hold of these guys, and before anyone even knew what it was, because everything I was able to convert everything over to it. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like the freedom. That's one thing I think that like Wizards of the Coast did well. Now, if you were to fast forward to now with like fifth edition, it's the character optimization and the ease of learning that makes it stand out. But I like the fact that you could take the simplistic rules that they changed it into and like really make what you want out of it. That's what you're saying is your golden era. Is probably what I'm experiencing right now because to have a campaign with 15 people in it and still be able to run it where like you change things and you make it
Well,
different for everyone.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
I think it's the transition from going from what is the rigid system, which is always D&D, no matter how much they try to expand it, and that first system that you find that it allows you to encompass whatever all of your creative ideas are, or translations are, like that first step away from it is probably like everybody's golden era. Even though everybody starts with D&D, there's always that one, because back in the early 90s it was GURPS. It is probably pretty close to what you're talking about with the current gaming system, which was uni- gaming universal role-playing system was GURPS. That's what those initials stood for. You were able to translate. They had everything from being a pirate to being a space marine. They had modules for fucking everything, and it was all just based on a 3D6 system.
That's so cool. Yeah, 3D6. Wow, it's funny. I was literally just gonna say, like breaking away from D&D is like the golden era for everybody.
Yeah.
That stood out to me because it's probably true. Because I just recently broke away from D&D to start a new game called Monster of the Week that uses a 2D6 system
Right.
for everything, and it's everything straight up. You have your
Nothing.
weird rolls, your tough rolls.
That's what Chaosium was for us. It was all percentiles, and that was Call of Cthulhu, and then Stormbringer came out next. And Stormbringer was my shit because I loved Elric, everything about it. The antithesis to being Conan, I don't know if you're familiar with Elric or Stormbringer or not, but
Elric, no. Stormbringer, barely. I
okay.
would not be doing justice to say I can have a conversation about it at all, but I've heard of it.
It's definitely it's a 5-book series, and if you've ever read Tolkien or fucking anything, you do yourself a favor and read it. It's probably one of the easiest reads and coolest storylines fucking ever. Like, really, it is. Like everything that um, everything that Game of Thrones comes from is really kind of piggybacked off of what Michael Moorcock did with Elric, dark fantasy. There was no dark fantasy before Elric. The only other version of that was Conan, and
Hmm.
Elric was the reverse of Conan. Instead of being the big muscle bound sword carrier, he was an albino who could barely fucking get himself out of bed without drugs. And his sword Stormbringer stole souls from those that he killed and transmitted the power to Elric, and he was able to conquer and journey the whole world because of the sword, not because of him. It's really cool. It really is.
Oh, that is really cool. That like I feel like that's inspiration for even stuff now, like with the breaking out in the subclasses in Paladin, like Oathbreaker Paladin and 5e and stuff like that, where you just like go dark
Yeah.
and you follow it strictly for the power because you break your oath and you're doing something else. It's crazy to see how much it's crazy to hear the inspiration and the changes.
Yeah.
It, yeah,
Edgar Rice Burroughs and everybody, Tolkien and everybody, they never wrote any of that stuff until Michael Moorcock did it with the Elric series and Count Brass and all of that stuff, but with the multiverse. But like there was no dark fantasy before that where you just pursued power for the sake of power. Like that didn't happen in any other books. And for an anti-hero to be written in, like it just didn't happen. It really didn't until the 19, I think it was like 65 or 66 with Michael Moorcock. writing that series. Yeah, anybody who's doing anything with fantasy right now, if you haven't read that, you kind of don't know what you're missing out on. You really
Mm.
don't.
Yeah, I want to get more into like reading fantasy and stuff because I can't have a conversation about it, and that's the one thing I guess growing as a DM, it's
Uh-huh.
something I get
Yeah.
into. But I am when I was just on mute there, I got a call, so I'm gonna
Okay.
start wrapping things up here.
Okay. That's cool.
I you know yeah, this is Chris, everybody. This is probably one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had.
Awesome, man.
To
Glad.
be honest, I mean, I'm gonna be on What's Your F'n Binge,
Hmm.
I guess soon enough. So
Yeah,
keep
I'll
your
have
ears
you
out for that.
here so whenever you're available. Yeah, man.
Um,
Just let me know when you're available. I'll have you on.
yeah. Now, any closing remarks for the fans back home, for the wife?
She never watches any of my shit. Like, one of the first things you'll have to actually count on being a podcaster is don't expect your friends to watch your shit.
Yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know,
I've learned that.
ones or whatever, because they hear you talk all the time about what you like. So they're like,
Yeah.
okay, talk about what he's already talked about. So it is what it is. But yeah, man, any social media that you have out there, just look up What's Your F and Binge. You'll be able to find us, find our show, and it's all comedy based. We're super explicit. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you'll never see me on a podcast without a beer and a joint in my hand. It's kind of just the way it is. I like just shooting from the hip and having fun with it, man.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's all about. I mean, this is what I love, and just to be able to hear you talk about all this has been super interesting. So thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
And thanks for everyone listening for coming to EP2, baby. EP2 of Fables Cove. Look out next episode for another cool guest we got coming on talking about their experience and their story with their players. And it's going to be a homebrew story. So, keep your eyes out for that. Is your Instagram or not, do you have Instagram, Facebook? Do you have any
Awesome.
public groups people can join?
Yeah, there's the What's Your F and Binge public page. There's the What's Your F and Binge private fan page. Between the two of them, there's like 5,000 members. Then on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you can look us up on What's Your F and Binge. Just look up What's Your F and Binge, and you'll find.